A couple of days ago, I saw the Minister of Finance, Mr. Jordan, promising an early budget for 2019. And I read the content of that article, and it's nothing new. He's promised that the budget will be presented to the National Assembly before the end of November. I thought that maybe they are trying to catch the local government elections, so to present a budget with a few goodies just to try to influence people on how they vote at the local government elections, which will be held in November. And that is still very likely, knowing the way that this government operates. It makes a lot of promises and has a poor track record on fulfilling those promises. So I anticipate the 2019 budget will promise all the stars and heaven in Guyana, and then very little will happen again. But I cannot believe that a Minister of Finance will ignore, from a technical perspective, all of the issues that we have raised associated with an early budget, particularly given his track record. I have spoken extensively about this, and up to recently I saw an entire program by our spokesperson on the economy, Irfan Ali, dedicated to pointing out in great details about how the numbers presented at budget time turned out to be false when the actual numbers were published. And if you have an opportunity to do so, please go back and look at that statement and the program, and you will get the details. But the issue is, when you go to the parliament, you debate the framework, and the country expects you to discuss how the economy performed in the current year, that it will be, if the budget is presented for 2019, it will be for 2018, and how based on that performance you will move forward. So we have seen in, say, 2016, the budget presented, and by 2017, there was a total revision, and look at the extent of the revision. Growth rate last year was revised 4 times. The growth rate was revised 4 times, and significantly down from what was presented in the November budget, when the actual numbers came in. Second, that is to deal with the real economy. Number 2, the fiscal deficit varied substantially when the actual numbers were presented a couple of months later in the new year from what Jordan presented in November. And if you look at the components of the fiscal deficit, you will see a massive change in what he presented in terms of revenue, current expenditure, and even capital expenditure. That is the PSIP, the Public Sector Investment Program, compared with what was the actual outcome. So we had false figures presented on revenue, on expenditure, both on the current side and the capital side. Therefore, the fiscal deficit figure that was derived was false. And so when the MPs sat in November to debate the budget, they were presented with patently false figures. That was much better than how the economy actually was performing. So in the debates, it constrained you because you're thinking, well, the economy performed well. We also saw on the external side a massive change in the balance of payment, a turnaround of close to 200 million US dollars. Imagine in November, you say this is the balance of payment figure. And then in one short month later, when the actual outcome comes in, it's worse by 200 million US dollars. And of course, all the components, they miscalculated deliberately, so I think they export receipts, import expenditures, etc. So the balance of trade, not just the balance of payment deficit, but the balance of trade was distorted. And then, of course, on the monetary variables, those were also distorted. So this minister once again says, I'm presenting an early budget. The budget, an early budget for him is an achievement. Not having accurate figures presented to the National Assembly for a productive and a proper debate. If he goes a month later, presents the budget in January, then he would have the actual numbers for debate. So once again, we see the minister, he says nothing about our concerns. And so we're going to have another debate there where he's going to present figures that look great. And then when the actual outcome is published, you will see totally different picture. Now, the Minister of Finance also issued a statement through the DPI yesterday. I suspect this is given that ExxonMobil has revised upwards the proven reserves of the basin. And we have seen a lot of optimism from our government because of this upward movement in proven reserves. So the Minister of Finance says, you, citizens, no oil coming. It is closer than you think. So there will be billboards informing you when the oil money will be available. You will have all of these things to notify you. Prepare yourself to get a piece of this action. This is ours to hold and ours to keep, but if you do not prepare ourselves to benefit from it, others will. Imagine this is our Minister of Finance saying he will be putting up billboards to tell us when the money will be coming. And the money that came, he refused the 18 million US dollars. He hid that for a year and a half. And he claimed that they didn't receive it. And until now, he hasn't paid it into the consolidated fund. But he wants to put up billboard to tell us when the money is coming. People must be seeing through this by now that APNU talks the game on oil and gas. That's the only thing they can talk about. And they're making, it's all about it's not realistic what they're saying. They're making it the picture, painting a picture that is all rosy for Guyana when the money comes in and everything will suddenly be solved. It's not so. So he says, look at all the people that are coming to our country. Look at the hotels that are completely filled. Many of the flights are bringing persons who are seeing the future prospects. But what about the economy, which is falling apart and people losing their jobs? Nearly 30,000 people now, because it's gone up the last time we did the estimates. So nearly 30,000 people have lost jobs since this government took office. What about them? And he see, oh, more people are at the hotels now, and that's the economy for him. So once again, we are faced with a political assessment of the oil and gas sector. And then the third thing that from the Ministry of Finance. So there was an article published in New York Times titled "The $20 Billion Question for Guyana." And I saw a response from the Ministry of Finance criticizing this article. So let me make it clear, I agree with the first part of the criticism, because I do believe that many journalists from the developed world come here with the sole purpose of making us look like backwater countries, and that we're on the precipice of civil war and ethnic conflagration, when we have in our country greater stability than those countries from which many of them come from. So I do believe about the unfair characterization of Guyana and Guyanese. Often they would look for the worst pictures of our country and put it in their articles. Now, we do have problems, but I am very clannish about how Guyana and Guyanese are portrayed abroad. And we disagree with any unfair portrayal. However, the ministry was very concerned about this statement that was in the article. And I quote from the article, "Foreign bank developers have told the government that legislation to create a sovereign wealth fund lacks sufficient regulatory controls to avert corruption, and that the legislation is in limbo." And the ministry took offense to this statement. They said, that is not the case. Actually, it is the case. The legislation is in limbo. It was promised 3 years ago, and until now we don't have it. It is an accurate portrayal of what is happening with the legislation. And what I have problems with in this article, that it was so benign to the government. They should not be criticizing them. This article is so benign to the government that they should be praising this gentleman. Because what has happened is that he did not deal with all of the other things in the article that we in Guyana know of. He did not deal with the fact that they hid the agreement for a year and a half, refused to release it on the basis that it had national security implications, and then a false assertion that the PPP prevented it from happening. He did not deal with the fact that they hid the 18 million bonus for a year and a half, and now, until now, they have not paid it into the consolidated fund as provided for by our laws, and we now have to file a case to get the money there. He did not deal with the model of the Petroleum Commission that they put that will give the minister all the powers. He did not deal with the issues of the contract itself, the elements of the contract that Guyana has problems with. He did not deal with the big questions that have been raised about the pre-contract cost. So this article on local government legislation, he didn't deal with that extensively. And so it's benign to the government. They should be embracing this, apart from the criticism of the portrayal of Guyana. Because an article like this, if you read it, would not show the turmoil in the sector that we have and the lack of direction by this government. And so imagine, there was one thing that the gentleman got though. He got an assertion from the president that they will auction the future blocks. So the article quotes the president as saying that he will auction future blocks. But you recall, we've been calling for this here in Guyana, and they refused to make a commitment to us. In Guyana, they said they had to hire a consultant to come in and tell them whether they should auction the blocks. But they can make that commitment to a reporter from the New York Times, but not the Guyanese people, that they will auction the remaining blocks. But let us see if they actually mean this. So this is something that I believe sincerely that we're on at a point in time where if we don't make the right decisions, then we're going to be, oil will not really benefit our people. And from the model of the legislation that I see that they mention in the same article, in this green paper, which is the national fund that they're going to create, the National Resources Fund, I think, the National Resource Fund. The fund itself is to be managed by the Bank of Guyana and overseen by a committee that encompasses several independent interest groups, including a representative nominated by the leader of the opposition. We don't want politicians, we ourselves, to manage this money. This fund has to be independently, technically managed, not by politicians again and stored by the central bank. We have a problem with that model. It departs radically from best practices like Norway and the other countries where they have an independent group that manages this. So even the model that they're talking about in this green paper will present a lot of problems for us, because Jordan can call the central bank and get some money anytime he wants it, or bully people. We have outlined, I'm not going to go through it again because I see they've said they adopted the Santiago principles that we are pushing for, but I'm not going to go through how, once again, how we see this managed. But we believe that it must be independently managed outside of the state, managed by a group that we all agreed with, and then the flows back to the budget must be predictable, and they must come only after certain conditions have been met, independently verified, and then taken to the National Assembly and voted upon. So I have explained this before. This explanation from the ministry in response to the article by the New York Times leaves us even more concerned about the kind of model that they're working on. So, and all of this is going on now at a time when we really, really need to move on with getting this framework in place. So I've seen the minister and the central bank again, Minister of Finance, they launch a crackdown on currency. And let me tell you, from all indications, they have an unbelievable shortage of currency in the central bank. The reserves have been declining, and they do not have money to meet, foreign currency that is, to meet their obligations. And so the crackdown has not been only with the people who are selling money or buying, these traders that who may be using US dollars. But from our intelligence, we heard that there have been meetings by Trotman and calls from the governor of the central bank to people saying that they have to sell a part of their money to the central bank or to the gold board, their gold. And so we are going to see this evolve a bit more, because you can't hide this for long. And this is not the end of the problem, because they have just raised about $30 billion through the bond. And when they start spending that, that will increase the demand for foreign currency. I had already pointed out in my budget debate presentation of how much of our budget, the economy now, is funded from domestic savings rather than foreign inflows. It's above 90%. It used to be in our era about 50% each, 50% of national expenditure. Domestic expenditure used to be funded from foreign sources and 50% from domestic savings. Now it's gone up to over 90% from domestic savings. And with this additional 30 billion that they borrowed and they intend to spend, what will happen is that it will put enormous, even more pressure on the foreign currency holdings, because you have more Guyana dollars being spent chasing the same supply of currency, the same amount that comes in. In fact, not the same amount, because it's falling, it's declining. Sugar earns less foreign currency now because of the drop in production and exports. And some of the other sectors have not been doing that well, forestry sector, etc. So we're going to have some major problems in the near term. I've seen, once again, the announcements about privatization of assets in Gaisuko. We have not seen the Price Waterhouse valuation of the assets. The government has moved forward now. We're not even sure that all of the parts of the government agree with this plan. Everything lacks transparency. And I believe that what is fast emerging is a cabal at SPU and NESEL that will give away these assets without following procedures, and that we'd have some corrupt transactions in these places, because they've practically dismantled the structure for privatization that we put in place through the white paper that we took to Parliament. And you would recall that we published everything that was privatized in a document, and that they all followed that process. The process outlined in the white paper that we took to Parliament. They've just set that aside, the entire privatization process now. So they can make a decision about which enterprise to privatize and how they privatize, and even accept a bid without any oversight. That white paper had several layers of oversight, ending with the cabinet. So we'd have to look out carefully about giving away the assets of Gaisuko. On the other hand, they're not addressing the issues of workers' liabilities, etc. On crime and security, when I met with the president, I mentioned to him about the issue that it's ravaging people and that the situation is uncontrollable. And I asked about the report that he had received from the British consultant. I'm not even clear about whether he committed or not. I'm still trying to find out whether he committed to make that report available to us, because he turned to Harman and asked him about the report. But that report was supposed to end all crime in Guyana. We have seen, that's what the president himself said. So we have not seen that report. I asked him about the changes that he's been making in the police force and what is motivating those changes, because we in the opposition and people in the country are not aware about those changes. And so he sought to explain those, but we have different views on them. And then so he placed this on the agenda for discussion in the future. But the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Public Security, has been talking a lot. I think by now most people would know that he's been a failure. And I've seen many people calling for his resignation. And so, whilst he's quoting statistics in the Parliament, the crime situation is just escalating on the ground to a point where people say to me, we don't call the police anymore for small issues. And so it is major. And I was intrigued to see that the people who were killed just recently, in this case, the government highlights them as a success in the fight against crime. But just imagine the PPP in office and the exact same thing happening. This would be now extrajudicial killing by the racist PPP government trying to exterminate Afro-Guyanese. As they said when they created that list of 400 people who had included, they said that we killed through extrajudicial means, and they included all the bandits and the victims and the policemen who were killed, and you had nearly 100 Indo-Guyanese there, but they said we had killed 400 Afro-Guyanese through extrajudicial means. Today, the same thing happened, but the narrative has changed. And I don't see the same groups that were out protesting against the PPP saying anything. It's all quiet. So it just shows how prejudiced it was, how biased it was, how convenient those groups were, the so-called rights groups. I just want to end, just to say the NTC, I met with a lot of the Tushos. We had a great engagement with many of the Tushos here at the Leader of the Opposition office. Many of them relayed to me the problems in their villages and the lack of attention by this government. I saw Trotman saying they had made great inroads into the hinterland among the Tushos, and talking about elections, and they were the ones who said that the elections shouldn't be political. Of course, it's a lot of nonsense. It's a figment of their imagination, because they don't really speak to the Tushos. They get their news from Valerie Lowe and Sidney Alicock, that they made great inroads. If this government were to speak directly to the Tushos, like we did, with literally hundreds of them, then you will find out that they are worried about their future and about the deteriorating quality of life of their people. They all came out with programs from their villages that they never got a chance to discuss here, because there was no interaction with them on those issues that are of primary concern to their people. And so we intend to continue to represent the two shows and the villages in the hinterland. I want to end by talking a little bit about what has happened since I spoke to the media about the engagement I had with the president. And so we've seen several statements. So we've seen, as usual, Nagamootoo saying that I threatened to kill him in Parliament. And then my picture appears in the article. It's one of the few times I think the Chronicle puts it there. So that I threatened to kill Nagamootoo. I don't have to threaten to kill Nagamootoo. Nagamootoo is looking for sympathy. And that Jagdeo, big bad Jagdeo, threatened to kill him in Parliament. You know, the thing is that Nagamootoo was the one in Parliament just a couple of days ago bringing his son-in-law to take a picture with me, and he was the photographer himself. He was the photographer, the Prime Minister, with taking his son-in-law. So Nagamootoo hopes that by saying this, then automatically the others will jump to his defense. You know, because he's part of the coalition, and Jagdeo laughing at you because he didn't lead no talks, or Jagdeo threatened to kill him. So Harman had to come out and defend him, and then Trotman to say, oh, the Prime Minister is relevant. Anytime people have to defend your relevance, you're irrelevant. That is a point for Nagamootoo. So that is what he was looking for. I didn't threaten to kill Nagamootoo. So that's one. Two, then he tries to say, worse, the attacks are racist and they see me as a Nimakaram. That a Hindi pejorative term that literally means traitor for selling out to an African-dominated coalition. So he's making this an ethnic issue now. So this is pure Nagamootoo for relevance. You know what he said to me in Parliament? He said the PPP could select its presidential candidate, any one of them, and I will go to the party congress and run against that person, and I will win. And he said that with the Apnu people listening to him. So he's creating relevance. And I said to him, you can't go to Berbice and get 3 persons to follow you, except in the group that you fetch with you. You're going to come to our Congress and win anybody? He needs psychiatric care now. He needs psychiatric care. When this man gets, and every week he has a platform to talk about this silly thing. I don't want to get into this pettiness, but he's looking for sympathy. And some people may be gullible to think that we're actually paying too much attention to him. And so I just wanted to say that. I wanted to say that. Even in the discussion with President Granger, I did not ask for his removal. That's what they made it look like. I said that somehow in the international community, there is a feeling that we don't want Nagamootoo to lead the talks because of who he is. And in the PPP, that is not our concern. Our concern is about his ability to commit the government, the coalition, or the PNC to anything he discusses. That he is seen as a lightweight, and that is evidenced by the fact that he does not have a substantive portfolio, contrary to to what was provided for in the Commingsburg Accord. And so, will he be able, the president could have easily said, no, I'll vest him with the portfolio, or I'll vest him with the powers, and you can rest assured that whatever he says there, we will agree to. And the president chose not to. The president said before I finished speaking, he said, if you have a problem with that, I'll lead the talks. So, if anybody threw him under the bus, they threw him under the bus, not us. We didn't even ask for his removal. We were concerned that he was using this as an excuse to the international community, that making the PPP seem capricious. You know, we didn't want to talk because of one man. Our hatred of one man trumped the future of Guyana. And we had to dispel that. And secondly, we had to dispel the other notion, which still resided until a few days ago in the international community, that they had offered, because they had, in conversations with Nagamutu, they created that impression that they had offered governance and power sharing, and that the PPP rejected those. Talks about governance, constitutional reform, and power sharing, and the PPP rejected those because we are too clannish. So now, that is why I said to the president, you need to define the agenda. And he did. He said, I said, what is it precisely you would like to talk about? And he listed 3 areas, and none of those areas included the things that were told to the international community by Nagamutu and the others, to make us look like we were the ones holding back discussions on governance and constitutional reform. So that was the purpose of the meeting, not Nagamutu. And so no matter how much all of his writings to look for sympathy, etc., it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Thank you very much.
Really summary information. Could you say, following that meeting with the president, if you guys set up any mechanism to follow up to actually start the talks?
No, we did not. I undertook to have a discussion with the party. We have been engaged in a full-fledged discussion at the party level. Yesterday we had Monday we had a meeting, extensive meeting, given that the local government elections date has been announced, and we got information that the nomination day will be on the 21st of September. So we had to kick our campaign into gear. We did so for Georgetown yesterday, Georgetown in the East Coast, today in Region 5 to do the same, tomorrow in Region 6, then on Saturday on both West Coast and East Bank, and then the following week in Region 2 and some of the other areas, particular, etc. So the party has been fully engaged on local government issues now, preparation for local government issues, and so we did not come around to discussing this issue and further holding the timeline for the selection of the presidential candidate. We'll get back to those 2 issues at a subsequent meeting of the executive. But the president indicated, however, in the casual conversations, that they will be busy in August because of their Congress. So I thought that was an indicator that maybe somehow, if there's going to be talks, we have to push it past the Congress too.
Are you 3 areas?
Huh?
The 3 areas.
The 3 areas I indicated earlier were the environment, that sector, oil and gas, and crime and security.
Are you hopeful that the talks will materialize, or do you think it will just...
You have like a number of people been calling me and saying that there is a pattern. So every time we want to talk, like I meet the president and there is some kind of feeling that we will progress to another stage, that some issue always comes up. And they showed me, like in 4 cases, just after the meeting with the president, Pradoville comes up, and I heard it's coming up again. So I don't know. The suspicion is that Nagamutu and Ramjatan and the others and the AFC keeps trying to stir these issues up every time you have indications that there may be talks, that to muddy the waters again, because they believe that if there are talks between particularly the main parties, the PPP and PNC, that they may be irrelevant, sidelined, etc. There is that feeling. Or it could be another group say that the president himself doesn't want these talks. So he himself gives directions through Harman to muddy the waters a bit. I heard that an attorney who was in Harman's office, was working for Harman in the past, who is now one of the special prosecutors in Soku, has been the one tasked with this, to move this issue to the front burner. But as I said before, I'm just speculating. These are things that I've heard. So I don't know if this is true, but they can't muddy our waters basically for us. We're firmly committed to the future of Guyana. And the party will discuss this matter, and we'll decide how, when, that these talks can't be just for convenience sake, that you want us to stop criticizing you because of your dismal record on safeguarding people, on crime and security. So you engage us in talks to muzzle us. Or alternatively, we've been critical of their lack of coherence and the secrecy surrounding their engagements on oil and gas. So if we engage them, then they will be like we'll be muzzled. We can't be muzzled by talks, but we want to be we want to give it a fair shot. We want to give it a fair shot.
So what are the areas the government is proposing to engage in talks?
The 3 areas I mentioned.
Oh, those are 3
The 3 areas.
the areas that you wanted.
That is why I said the last time that all of this, what I'm just giving you, is in a rambling fashion, no even to my thought. I'm just telling you what I've been hearing, because I intend to put the issue before the executive of the party. We'll discuss these issues, and then we will decide whether we want to add issues to the agenda. And when that is completed, then we will notify the president.
Is there anything pressing that you would want?
At this stage, I don't want to prejudge what the party will discuss and agree on. I do have my own ideas, but I don't want to share them publicly now, because if they become the ideas, then they will say it's me, not the party decided.
And on the presidential candidate, I know you said that
Yes, we have to meet again to settle the timeline on that.
there has been some discussion, like in the public domain, about widening the search that should not be limited only to the party's central exec.
Sure. And as I said before, that the party has a laid out procedure, and I outlined what that procedure is, And I said the only people who can change that procedure, all right, would be either the Congress itself or the 35 members of the Central Committee. So unless they change that, then that is the process we are obligated to follow, unless the Central Committee itself changes that. Because the Congress, there was no resolution to Congress the last time to change the way we select our presidential candidates.
And people are excited right now about the process. I mean, about finding a candidate.
Yeah, well, our party will follow the process, and whoever emerges, I'm confident the party will rally around that person, and we will go on to win the elections.
Jagdeo, over there's been some back and forth comments between some members of the judiciary, the financial sector, and some representatives of SARA and so forth regarding access to information from banks. As it stands, our legislation does not specifically say how financial institutions such as central banks should go about getting specific information. And I want to know, in that circumstance, is this something you'd advocate for that they change?
Well, I saw the statement from the Bar Association, and they were absolutely right to criticize the deputy director of SARA. I should not call him that because from what I gather, he is not properly elected to that position or selected to that position. That the new legislation mandates a selection process that was not followed when they enshrine him or put him in that position. So his presence there might be illegal. He may be squatting on the job. And but they are right to criticize him for seeking to lecture the judiciary about their decisions. And he wants a particular decision. Now, I have big concerns about judicial sleuth, but I'm not saying that you should give a favorable position to the PBP or an unfavorable position. I have questions about the sleuth. Even up to today, I think that we've gone to the Court of Appeal on the Patterson matter, the ruling by the Chief Justice acting, and we have written the Court of Appeal to ask for an early date because this is an election-related matter. We've seen how other jurisdictions treat similar matters. And I heard the Attorney General went there today and tried to stall the process. So imagine they should be anxious to get this out of the way, but he tried to stall the process. So we will be critical of that if they have slowed in the system. But here you have an individual who wants to tell the judiciary what kind of decision they must make. And if they make an adverse one to the SARA in protecting people's rights here, they come for criticism, they come up for criticism. And so it's that within that context, I supported the statement. Now, your point, I think you can have great clarity. I don't think it's a question of clarity over what type of decision is required or information that is requested. It's not a question about clarity of information. It is several things: the administrative burden on the bank and the issue of privacy. And so those are the issues that are being contested in court now, and the courts would rule one way or another. The courts have to balance protecting individual freedoms, liberties, rights, and the necessity of the government to do its work. And so the courts would make that adjudication. But in this case, so I don't think it's a deficiency in the law. It's just that the individuals who are there, who keep making these outrageous statements, political statements, as I said to President Granger himself, I said that the US has a $2 trillion underground economy. Europe and the others, 20% of their economy is estimated as underground economy. You have some very clever people here who would reduce it to zero at SARA. Maybe we should give technical assistance to Europe and stuff by sending them there. Actually, that would be good for Guyana.
And with respect to the legislature, do you believe that there's a need for Parliament to ramp up the resources that may be at its disposal, especially with the coming of oil and gas and the scrutiny that will be needed?
Sure. I had an engagement with a team from the Caribbean Development Bank. So they want to do a project to improve the skills of our members of parliament to interrogate public expenditure. And I said right at the outset, I support the project and our MPs will attend. What I said to them, however, is that if the goal is greater transparency, it is not the lack of training of our MPs that have led to less accountability and less transparency in the parliament. There are several things. One is that the speaker himself needs to be trained to understand public expenditure and linkages, and to give enough time for proper interrogation of public expenditure. So the Minister of Finance gets up and he says, oh, I don't have that information available. Or we did that yesterday. Valda Lawrence gets up and says, we will terminate the drug bond by February of next year in our budget presentation. It's now July. They haven't terminated this contract, the corrupt contract, but we can't get her to keep her commitment. And if you ever try to interrogate her, because it's Valda Lawrence, he's an office holder, and that's his public expenditure. Our speaker, he says, stay relevant. You can't even digress because he doesn't understand linkages between variables. Sometimes you have to start by setting up the case. So adequate time in Parliament is necessary for this. Two, the responsiveness of the ministers themselves. So we ask hundreds of questions and you get one-line answers. So we can't get any closer to who collected all of the money, the $700 million from private sources for the building of the Durban Park property. We don't know who these individuals are because they have not submitted the statements. We have spent $900 million there of public money, and we can't even find out, they don't have records of a lot of this. They don't have records of this. And so that is the problem with interrogating public expenditure. So whilst there is need for greater training of members of parliament, you don't have an opportunity. We have a government that does not give answers, does not like to give answers, and been hiding a lot of things. So I heard recently that the new building that they hired for the gold board was the AFC campaign headquarters in the past government. and now when they were campaigning before the 2015 elections. So Trotman is the head of the AFC. Now he rents that building there, and they've decided to burn the Mercury just here in the city again. And can't they just take it out of town? Just down some place where we don't have people living there. So they're put at risk, probably thousands of people in Queenstown now once again. They would say all the systems are in place, but one failure of a system would lead to contamination there and put at risk all the people in Queenstown. That sort of thing. And you ask Trotman, he didn't know about it. Trotman doesn't know that the Gold Board moved to their campaign headquarter building in the past, from the 2014 era.